Okay, so today we're going to talk about finding your voice as a poet. And my qualifications for why I can help you find your voice as a poet are that I am the 2021 Youth Poet Laureate of the Southern United States, a best-selling author of the novel in verse Walking Gentry Home, and a Young Arts winner in spoken word poetry, and I've won a bunch of awards and all that kind of stuff, but I know a lot about poetry, so I'm going to help you find your voice as a poet, and hopefully you'll be able to become a very interesting, exciting poet who I can be a fan of one day. I think that'd be awesome. The first thing you want to do when you're trying to discover your voice as a poet is you want to explore your influences. So you want to read a lot of poetry. You want to start with poets maybe who are a little bit like you. If you aren't very familiar with poetry, you can start with a poet who comes from a similar background to you or a similar culture to you, and you can read their poetry. And then through reading their poetry, you can sort of understand what the classic voice of a poet who's like you sounds like. So maybe you read several poets who are from your background and you'll see the similarities and the differences in their voices. And the thing about a voice in poetry is that it's very unique to you specifically, and it evolves out of all the different elements that contribute to your identity. So I am a Black woman, but I'm not just a Black woman. I'm also a queer Black woman, but I'm not just a queer Black woman. I'm a queer disabled Black woman. And all of these elements layer on top of each other to create a unique voice in my poetry and my writing that nobody else can really, I guess you could imitate it, but nobody else can really do the way I do it because it's so specific to me and my identity and my personality, I suppose you could say. So you want to really explore your influences. One of my biggest influences as a poet is Morgan Parker. I'm obsessed with Morgan Parker. She's an incredible poet. One of her books called There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce is one of my favorite books of poetry of all time. It has some really incredible poems in it, and my favorite poem by her is Matt. And I actually wrote a response poem to Matt about from the perspective of Matt, or what I think Matt would be thinking. And that really helped me explore my voice as a poet and explore voice in general as a poet. And I think it created a really unique experience and a really exciting form of exploration of poetry for me and my voice. Then you want to, after you explored your influences, you want to develop your craft. So you want to regularly practice poetry. You want to write as much as you can. You want to read as much as you can. And you want to try and write not just in the common forms of poetry, but in styles that are new to you, and explore styles that are different than ones you're familiar with that you feel comfortable in. So if you're a poet who usually writes sonnets, try writing something free verse. If you're a poet who only writes haikus, try writing a limerick. Give it some spice, give it a little exploration, do something different. And through that process, it'll really help you to figure out what you need to do differently to get the voice you've always been seeking, to develop the voice, not get, but to develop the voice you always wanted to have, that unique voice that someone can read and immediately identify, yep, that's the poetry of so-and-so. And doing this will help you develop your writing to the point where it has its own flavor and its own unique chemistry of words so that it sounds like you. You want to do a lot of writing exercises. You want to do a lot of writing prompts. And you want to experiment and play with format and style and tone and sometimes rhyme and rhythm. I think that's a really fun thing to play with when you're trying to define your own voice. Playing with rhyme and rhythm can be really interesting because not all poets do rhyme and, well, all poets do rhythm, but not all poets do rhyme. So if you might decide you want to be a rhyming poet, and so you're going to have to get really good at rhyming in every different way, shape, and form so that rhyme can be a part of your unique voice as a poet. Another thing you want to do when you become a poet, when you want to define your voice, is you want to embrace your uniqueness. You might have a poet you're obsessed with. You might have a poet you absolutely adore, but their voice cannot be your voice. You can write poems imitating their voice, but if you want to be a poet in your own right who stands on their own, who is identifiable in the poetry scene, you have to have your own unique voice. And the thing you need to do to find that voice is embrace your unique qualities and explore your unique qualities so that you can be the kind of poet that you are and not the kind of poet you think that you should be or the kind of poet that someone else is. You want to be the kind of poet that you are and the kind of poet that only you can be. Another thing that's really important in poetry is trusting your instincts. So when you're writing a poem, you might have an instinct to go with a word that maybe is a little bit unusual, that maybe feels like, oh, maybe this isn't the right word, or maybe this is too strange of a word, or maybe this word is like, maybe it's cliche, or maybe it's too pretty, or maybe it's too frou-frou. Like serendipitous is like an interesting word that maybe someone might use a lot in their writing, or maybe they'll never use it in a million years. But if you feel drawn to the word serendipitous and you want to use it in your poetry, then trust your gut and go with the word that your gut is telling you to use. Because poetry is a lot about instincts. It's about craft, but it's also about instincts. So you want to trust your instincts because your instincts are what make your voice so densely unique. You also want to discover different cultures of poetry. So maybe you want to study ghazals, which is a form of poetry from Asia. Or maybe you want to study the classic, which is a haiku, which everyone studies when they're young. Or maybe you want to study the Golden Shovel poem, which is a really interesting and younger form of poetry that really rose up through the beat poet scene in the 1950s in New York. I believe it was the 1960s, actually. The 1960s in New York. And Golden Shovel poems are one of my favorite form of poems, and I really discovered my rhythm in my poetry through Golden Shovel poems because it's kind of like an acrostic, but in reverse. And it's a really exciting form of poetry. I'll probably talk about it in a later video, but I highly recommend playing around with different cultures of poetry to find which sort of spice or influence fits with your heart. A big part of writing good poetry is getting feedback and taking that feedback seriously into account and using it to make your poetry better. So join a poetry feedback group, join a writer's club or a writer's group or your local high school poetry club and get that feedback and use it to make your poetry better. The best thing you can do for your writing is give it to someone else and then let them say what they think about it, and then you decide if you agree with that. So you're not going to agree with every piece of feedback you get, and that's good. You shouldn't agree with every piece of feedback you get. But most of the time, they're going to be able to see something that you can't quite see. So you'll be able to take that influence, that input into account and change what you have to make it better and improve your poetry and your writing. And that will help you develop your voice. You should also keep a poetry journal, practice reading aloud, and set goals. You should also set goals about what you want to do with your poetry every semester, every year, every quarter. It doesn't really matter what metric of time you use for setting your goals, as long as you set goals and you keep to them. And those are just some really good tips for developing your voice as a writer and a poet. And I really hope you like this video, and I hope you will come back and watch more of my videos. Thank you. Please subscribe if you would like to see more. Leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.